Condoleezza Rice testified today on Capitol Hill on the 2006 budget. We'll hear opening statements from members of the House Appropriations Subcommittee. Topics include relations with Syria, U.S. aid to Palestinians, and policy towards Iran. This is 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Secretary.
Chairman.
The Subcommittee on Foreign Operations of the House Appropriations Committee will come to order. Madam Secretary, it's with considerable pleasure that we welcome you to your first hearing before this Subcommittee on Foreign Operations of the House Appropriations. I know as Chairman, and I think I speak for all of us, we're looking forward to working with you, and we all wish you great success in your role as Secretary of State. Additionally, I want to extend a warm welcome to the newest members of this subcommittee. On the Republican side, our new Vice Chairman, sitting here next to Mr. Lewis here, Don Sherwood of Pennsylvania, and then Congressman John Sweeney of New York, who is not here yet, and Denny Rehberg of Montana, and Congressman John Carter from the state of Texas. And on the Democratic side, we have Chata with us here today. Chaka Fata, I get it backwards there, Chaka. Thank you very much. We're glad to have you join us too as well, and I know you'll be a great addition. We have a lot of ground to cover this afternoon, Madam Secretary, so let me begin. This hearing today will have an initial discussion of the President's request for fiscal year 2006 for the programs that are under the jurisdiction of the Foreign Operations Subcommittee. But we have an even more immediate priority, and that's the $33.9 billion foreign assistance request that's part of the 2005 emergency supplemental, which was transmitted to Congress on Monday. The diplomatic and security challenges facing the United States are no less complicated or numerous than in past years, so it should be no surprise that the President is requesting a double-digit increase in the foreign operations budget. The President's request totals $22.8 billion in fiscal year 2006. That's a 16% increase from 2005 when enacted supplementals and emergencies are counted, but it does not include the $3.9 billion supplemental request submitted to Congress on Monday. While this increase may be entirely justified by political conditions in the world, this subcommittee will not write a blank check to fund foreign operations, nor will it be unmindful of competing spending priorities closer to home. This subcommittee understands and will forcefully advocate a position that foreign assistance is an integral part of our national security policy. But we also know that every subcommittee of this committee and every agency must scrutinize its budget request in an effort to contribute to deficit reduction. Thus, the fiscal year 2006 budget will require some difficult choices from this Congress, the committee, and this subcommittee. Madam Secretary, since increases for international affairs budget requests will have to compete with other non-defense budget priorities, it's imperative that we work closely together to ensure that the President's priorities are clearly identified and, to the extent possible, integrated with the priorities of Congress. Certainly our first and greatest priority should be to continue pursuing the global war on terrorism. Iraq and Afghanistan need our continued attention and this Congress's support as we continue military operations while building stable democracies there. We must continue to support our allies in the war on terrorism. Their involvement in the coalitions we've forged in Afghanistan and in Iraq helped secure our country while encouraging the spread of freedom and democracy in those areas. Our battle to halt the spread of HIV/AIDS is a demonstration of American values and compassion. The fiscal year 2006 budget request includes a total of $3.2 billion for the third year of this initiative. $2.5 billion of that would come from accounts under the jurisdiction of this subcommittee. The $3.2 billion, if approved by Congress, would keep the initiative on track to reach the President's goal of a 5-year, $15 billion commitment for HIV and AIDS funding. Madam Secretary, you are beginning your tenure at the State Department at a time when the structure of foreign assistance is undergoing some rethinking. While the changes are gradual in nature, the long-term impact could and would be substantive. Some of those changes I welcome, but some, I confess, give me pause. First, I view with concern an emphasis of this administration to have the Department of Defense become more involved in what have been traditional State Department functions. In the administration's 2006 budget request for the Department of Defense, the President proposes an additional $750 million to train and equip Iraqi and Afghan security forces. This includes training of civilian police, a function that up to now has always been overseen by the State Department. Furthermore, this proposal expands this authority beyond Iraqi and Afghan forces to nearby, quote-unquote, friendly nations in the region. Second, 17 countries are now designated as eligible for compacts with the Millennium Challenge Corporation, a program for which the administration is seeking a $1.5 billion increase in 2006. The role of USAID is changing in these 17 countries, and arguably that's an appropriate response. I've been a strong supporter of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. I'm proud of the role I played in helping to draft that legislation, incorporated into our bill to enact it. But we have to note that the MCC has yet to complete even one compact with the funds appropriated in 2004 and 2005. While I understand why it has not done so, it's incumbent, I think, on the administration to make the case of why this model of delivery should receive increased funding over competing requests for resources in the absence of any track record that we can point to for the MCC. Finally, the President has requested a new conflict response fund to fund the State Department's new Office of Conflict, Stabilization, and Reconstruction, which was created in last year's Commerce State Justice Appropriations Act. I do not think a compelling case has been made for this fund. What would it accomplish? What capabilities would it provide that are not already funded through other appropriations accounts? I look forward to learning more about the purposes and the uses of this fund in your testimony and our questions. The bottom line is clear. Responsibilities for foreign assistance are changing. Since these changes are initiated by the administration, I hope that you, as Secretary, can outline for us today your strategy for foreign assistance and provide some assurance that these moving pieces will be coordinated better than they have in the past. My remarks haven't even touched on the specifics of the $82 billion fiscal year 2005 supplemental request that the committee received earlier this week. The portion of that request, as we've said, it's under our jurisdiction, is $3.9 billion. So it's going to be a difficult year, and we're going to need your cooperation more than ever. I think today we're going to focus a lot of our questions on the supplemental request, and I hope that either you or your designee would be returned to the subcommittee next month to answer additional questions we will have about the 2006 request once the budget justification materials have been reviewed by the committee, staff, and members. So, Madam Secretary, prior to your statement, let me ask my ranking minority member, Ms. Lowy, and our chairman and ranking member of the full committee for any statements they may have. Mrs. Lowy.
I join Chairman Colby in welcoming Secretary Rice to her first hearing before the Foreign Operations Subcommittee, and I congratulate you on your confirmation, and I look forward to working closely with you. I regret that we have such a short time to address such a wide range of topics, and with my chairman's indulgence, as a New Yorker, I will speak quickly, and I intend to raise several concerns in my statement and then follow up later during the question period. While I realize you do not have primary responsibility for conducting the war in Iraq, I expect that you will have a direct role in winning the peace. I'm sure you'll be working closely with Secretary Rumsfeld, General Petraeus, and his staff. The general and his troops have the most difficult job imaginable, and I have great respect for them. But I and many others have serious concerns. I congratulate the people of Iraq on their successful election. The Iraqi people demonstrated to the world that they cherish the right to vote and that they will risk life and limb to exercise that right, as many peoples have done before them. The elections were a definite and positive step toward democracy, a first step on a long road. We all want to see a stable, democratic Iraqi government that has the support of its people. Given that the United Iraqi Alliance has captured a plurality, not a majority, of the vote, tough negotiations lie ahead. And I would be interested in hearing your thoughts about how a friendly representative government can emerge from the process. In addition to a strong democratic government, we understand that in order to bring the troops home, it's necessary to have a trained, effective security force in place. The administration continues to assert that we have trained as many as 130,000 Iraqi security forces. The actual number of effectively trained Iraqi security forces is less than half that, and I would appreciate your assessment of this situation. Progress also continues to be slow in reconstruction, with widespread power outages and high unemployment. The original reconstruction plans appear to be overly rigid and need to constantly be adapted to the evolving realities on the ground, and I'm sure we will have a good discussion on these important issues. I'd like to turn to the FY05 supplemental and FY06 requests briefly. With respect to the FY 2005 supplemental request, I applaud the request for tsunami release, and I believe the United States has taken the opportunity to demonstrate our generosity and leadership in a time of global tragedy. I remain concerned, however, that in both Sri Lanka and Indonesia there seems to be a reluctance to draw on the shared tragedy of this event to work toward resolving long-standing conflicts. It seems to me that this is an opportunity to move the parties towards conflict resolution and to ensure that our reconstruction funds do not support repression of the Achinese people in the resettlement process. Also, any form of re-engagement with the Indonesian military on our part has to be accompanied with a strong push to achieving institutional reforms and respect for basic human rights. I am enthusiastic about our role in what seems to be a unique opportunity in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Recent events have made me cautiously optimistic that both sides are truly embarking on a new future of coexistence. I'm sure we are in agreement that we must remain vigilant in eliminating terrorist activity and infrastructure and continue to ensure that safeguards are in place so U.S. funds support entities truly working for peace. It remains unclear how the administration plans to provide assistance to the Palestinian Authority, and I look forward to working with the administration to advance the peace process. However, direct consultation is essential. Far too often, I'm forced to rely on the media for current information. With respect to Afghanistan, I do have grave concerns that the administration's proposal to begin aerial eradication of the poppy fields will destabilize an already fragile situation. While we all regret the explosion of poppy cultivation there, spraying crops with no economic alternative for local farmers in place is a recipe for destabilization in my judgment. Skepticism about this approach is also shared by our military commanders in Afghanistan. This proposal should not be approved until sound economic alternatives are in place. I would also note that the entire $82 billion supplemental request, including the $5 billion requested for international programs, is off budget, adding to the federal budget crisis. And I also share my chairman's concerns about the $7 billion of the $75 billion requested for the Defense Department for training and equipping Iraqi and Afghan forces. Funds for these purposes have traditionally been under the oversight of the Foreign Operations Subcommittee and should remain so. Turning to the FY 2006 requests, I have to express my enthusiasm and my disappointment. The 16% increase requested is a major milestone. However, the priorities selected, in my judgment, miss a golden opportunity. We finally achieved a consensus to increase our investment in international assistance, recognizing that it is vital to our national security. Unfortunately, the vast majority of increased funding is going to the Millennium Challenge Corporation and for the HIV crisis. Now, the increased funding for the HIV/AIDS crisis is necessary. I strongly support it. Our challenge there, as we know, is to continue a balanced approach to finding solutions. However, because the organization of the new corporation has been slow and the delivery of assistance was inevitably delayed, Congress is likely to deny a significant portion of the $3 billion request today. Today, $2.5 billion has been appropriated, but not one dime has gone out to a qualifying country. By my estimate, we'll be fortunate if $200 million is spent in 3 or 4 countries during FY 2005. And given that reality, in a tight budget year, the $3 billion requested becomes a tempting target. Unfortunately, in my judgment, this means lost opportunity for the world's poor. A careful look at the FY 2006 budget reveals that the delivery of actual assistance to many of our traditional aid recipients will actually decrease in FY 2006 if adjustments are not made. This means opportunity lost on a number of fronts. Our capacity to expand the number of countries where we conduct basic education programs diminishes. Our capacity to spread the miracle of the political revolution in Ukraine to other former Soviet states that continue to suffer under dictatorship is lessened. As we continue to spend billions in Colombia, we are ignoring Central America. Their needs have been relegated to a low priority, despite the emergence of leaders intent on reform and the rapid rise of gang activity and drug trafficking. Nicaragua is in the midst of a political crisis. The resurging popularity of the Sandinista Party may have been avoided with more concentrated and consistent U.S. help. Programs to stem the rise of terrorism in secular Muslim countries outside the Middle East, such as basic education, cultural and scholastic exchanges, democracy building, have gone unfunded. Countries in crisis in Africa, such as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ethiopia, and Liberia, have received scant attention and have unmet needs right now. I know you're well aware of all the challenges ahead, Madam Secretary. I appreciate your expertise, your commitment, as well as the dedication and hard work of the State Department staff. And I hope we can work together to address the many challenges we share, and I look forward to your remarks.
Chairman Lewis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State of the United States of America. Really an incredible development for our country on behalf of our role to make a difference for peace in the world. I couldn't be more proud than I am to have both your grace and talent, the intellectual power you bring to this job, have come from, at least part of the time, my state, California. Indeed, I look forward to working with you, and I'm looking forward to your statement as well. I'd like to, during the time I have, make just 2 points. The first is that I have already convened meetings with staff directors of the 3 subcommittees that kind of swirl around the work that you do, the Defense Subcommittee, State, where they handle your budget, and the Foreign Operations Subcommittee, in order to express concern that we have at the highest level within our conference about elements of the proposed supplemental that may be deemed emergency. And I'll be leaving in a while to meet with the OMB director to discuss this further, and I hope that we can talk about it as well. The little doubt that we need to move on with our 06 appropriations process in regular order. The supplemental needs to move very quickly. To the extent that emergency designation that could be challenged in this process slows that down, could cause us to change the strategy that presently is before us. The second point, I had no intention to raise at all, but the last time I was here, we had an Undersecretary of State before us, and I was heard to say that I hope that we would never see another crop from the poppy fields in Afghanistan. Whatever we do, let us not allow that growth of poppy leading to poison to be a result of our lack of action. We could subsidize, provide full funding for the peanuts those farmers get, and at the same time stop huge capital flows to the terrorists who would undermine our abilities to project peace. So poppy fields, no. If we have to help farmers, that's another question. In the meantime, I really do believe that our ranking member, the gentlelady from New York, and I agree on this issue. We just have expressed it differently. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Obey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, welcome. I know that most of this hearing will be focused on the Middle East and Iraq. And I'm sure that all of our members will have plenty of questions on that. I would like to just raise some very different questions. The President of the United States has seen fit to suggest that we borrow a huge amount of money in order to play fruit basket upset with the Social Security system because of a, quote, crisis that he sees coming at us in the year 2042. 2042 can seem to be a long ways away, but 1 year from now, I will have been in Congress that same 37-year period. And so I can testify from personal experience that tomorrow does get here. And I guess my question is this. I know we're focused on Iraq. I know we are focused on Iran. I know we are focused on Korea. Separate problems, tight focus. But my question is, what kind of world do we think we're going to be living in internationally 37 years from now? In that same year that the president points to, 2042. What's the world going to look like economically and politically and militarily? We have expectations that China will surpass us in economic size sometime in the next 15 years. India will be growing into a huge economy. We are feeding that growth with our own technology. But what are our expectations about what China will look like politically, economically, and militarily? What kind of a military do we expect to deal with from China 37 years from now? On the economic and political and military front, how do we expect to respond to the reality of a world where we are not number one in terms of our own economic size and power and reach? How do we expect that we will be relating to the Europeans? We have drawn rather further apart from them lately, given our divisions over Iraq. I mean, what kind of potential associations do we see ourselves having with Europe and its economy in that world that will be coming at us sooner than any of us expect? What do we expect to see in our backyard in Central America? We fought a war over Nicaragua, and now the same people who we fought a war to keep out of power are pretty close to coming back, if you can believe some people. What do we expect Mexico to be like in 37 years? What are our border relationships going to be? And what do we expect on the most important of all fronts, nuclear proliferation? What kind of world are we going to be living with on that subject? What I'm looking for, I mean, we hear the neocon vision expressed about Iraq and the Middle East. I want to know what the broader vision is about the entire world. What does the administration, what are you doing to be thinking about these problems, and what should Congress be doing about it? Because I think we're going to get so mired we're going to be talking about Iraq 3 years from now. We're still going to be stuck in a mud bath there. And the danger is that if we keep looking at the short-term problems to the exclusion of long-term, we won't be reacting. I mean, with Iran itself, we've been screwed up on our relationship with that country ever since we dumped Mossadegh. And we've been paying the price for not allowing a nationalism to emerge, and we paid the price with the emergence of the Ayatollahs. And frankly, I'm very confused about what our policy is toward Iran. It seems to me that one day it looks like we're going to be very firm with them, and the next day we seem to be going off in a different direction. I'd just like to know what the direction and what the vision of this administration is on those items.
Thank you very much, Mr. Obey. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your patience here, listening to us speak. Now it's your turn. We'd very much like to hear your statement. Of course, the full statement can be placed in the record if you wish to summarize it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. I will, Mr. Chairman, just excerpt from the statement and then have the whole thing put in the record, if that's all right.
That will be done, of course.
I appreciate the opportunity to address you. This is a time of hope and opportunity, but of course it's a time of challenge for us, too. I look forward to working with you for a strong bipartisan approach to this time of hope and opportunity and challenge. In his recent State of the Union message, President Bush spoke of the unprecedented efforts that we've taken since September 11th, 2001, with our allies and our friends around the world to defeat terrorism. But in the long term, he has noted, the only force powerful enough to stop the rise of tyranny and terror and replace hatred with hope is the rise of human freedom. President Bush has charged the men and women of the Department of State with helping to create a balance of power that favors freedom. I recently traveled, as you know, in order to try and advance our diplomatic agenda to Europe and to the Middle East. I spoke with European leaders, I spoke with Middle Eastern leaders, and of course President Bush will continue this dialogue with our European friends when he arrives in Europe on February 21st. I would say that this was a trip in which I garnered the tremendous constructive spirit that is there among our European allies, a spirit to put whatever differences we've had behind us, to turn a new page, and to write another chapter in the history of what has been really a grand alliance, an alliance that faced down tyranny and that spread freedom and liberty. And I found very constructive attitudes there, and I want to assure you that we will continue to pursue a constructive course with our European friends. We focused, as you might imagine, a lot on the Middle East. The path of democratic reform in the Middle East is going to be difficult and uneven, but the spread of freedom, the work of generations, is urgent work that cannot be deferred in that part of the world. I think you will see in the President's budget request that that urgency about reform in the Middle East is reflected. The request includes $120 million for the Middle East Partnership Initiative, $40 million for the National Endowment for Democracy to support the broader Middle East initiative, and $180 million for Muslim outreach through educational and cultural exchanges. An increase in our educational and cultural affairs budget because we need very much to stay open to the world. Every leader that I spoke with in Europe also understood our common interest in building on the recent successes and in stabilizing and advancing democratic progress in Afghanistan and in Iraq. For our part, in order to build on the momentum in Afghanistan following last October's presidential elections, President Bush has requested nearly $1.1 billion. This money is to be used to invest in health and education and clean water and free market infrastructure. It includes also $437 million for operations, as you've just discussed, to counter the threat of narcotics. And the FY 2005 supplemental seeks $2 billion for Afghanistan to expand police and counter-narcotics programs that are more immediate in need than the 2006 budget would be able to address. This supplemental also includes $60 million for embassy security in Afghanistan. The numbers are there, but let me just say one word about Afghanistan. It was, of course, the source of al-Qaeda, its home base. It was the place from which terrorism sprung full-blown to attack us on September 11th. And it's a remarkable transformation in just a little over 3 years to a place that is not now a failed state where terrorists reside, but rather a fragile state in which we have a good ally in the war on terrorism, and we would like to consolidate the gains in Afghanistan so that the next parliamentary elections can take place and we can stabilize that country. The European countries with which I spoke, leaders with which I spoke, also recognize that we now have a common goal of stabilizing and promoting democracy in Iraq. President Bush has, in the 2006 budget, requested $360 million for economic assistance targeted toward key needs in Iraq. And the FY 2005 supplemental includes $690 million to continue U.S. mission operations and $658 million to construct a new embassy compound that will be safe and secure for our personnel for the long term in Baghdad. At their meeting at Sharm el-Sheikh with President Mubarak and King Abdullah, both Prime Minister Sharon and President Abbas called it a time of opportunity, and I have to say that when I would walk into meetings, I was quite taken with the fact that The meeting with Prime Minister Sharon and the meeting with President Abbas both began with the words, "This is a time of opportunity and we should seize it." The President has already announced, as a result, $350 million to help Palestinians build infrastructure and sustain their reform process over the next 2 years. Of that $350 million, $150 million is included in the 2006 budget request and $200 million in the supplemental. Even as we work with our friends and allies in the broader Middle East, of course, we face challenges and opportunities in the rest of the world. We seek $3 billion for the third year of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. This is the bold, growth-promoting approach to development, which helps countries that are governing justly, adopting sound economic policies, and investing in the welfare of their people. We also seek $2.4 billion in development, child survival, and health assistance for other countries. This budget would help us to promote a development assistance agenda that recognizes that some poor people, of course, live in countries in which good governance is not there, but that we need very much to recognize that the future of development assistance really rests on changing underlying structures as well. You're not going to make the best use of development aid unless you have good governance, unless you have governments that fight corruption, unless you have governments that are willing to invest in their people. And that's the entire notion of the Millennium Challenge. Our 2006 request includes $734.5 million for the Andean Counter-Drug Initiative, and we're requesting $5.8 billion in assistance to our partners in the global war on terror. I'm sure that members of the committee will agree that when we engage them effectively, multilateral institutions can multiply the strength of freedom-loving peoples. We're requesting nearly $1.2 billion for U.S. obligations to international organizations, including the United Nations, and a little over $1 billion to pay projected U.S. assessments for UN peacekeeping missions. We're seeking $114 million to enhance the peacekeeping capabilities of non-UN forces, particularly in Africa, where we've had some success with African forces taking on peacekeeping roles. The 2005 supplemental request does seek $780 million to fund UN-assessed costs for peacekeeping that were not assessed at the time of the 2005 budget, but would deal with peacekeeping missions in Ivory Coast, Haiti, Burundi, and Sudan, Darfur. We've seen how states where there's chaos can come back to haunt us. And it was mentioned that we are beginning to see restructuring of the way that we deal with post-conflict situations, the way that we deal with foreign assistance. I think it's only natural coming out of the end of the Cold War that some of the structures that we've had are not as appropriate or as useful, and that we need other structures. And it is in this context that the President has charged us at the State Department with coordinating our nation's post-conflict and stabilization efforts. And this is the idea behind the Office of the Coordinator for Reconstruction and Stabilization that would be housed in the department. We're asking for $24 million for that in the 2006 budget, but the supplemental seeks $17 million for startup cost and personnel cost in the coordinator's office. The 2006 budget request would also be for $100 million for a conflict response fund, because it is very often not possible to foresee the kind of response mechanisms that one will have to engage in when a conflict emerges. We've had them emerge many times in between budget cycles, for instance, in Liberia or in Haiti. And this is to help deploy trained and experienced civilian personnel to unstable regions. It speaks to the question of what the Defense Department can do and what the State Department can do, and we need a much better articulated, much more coherent civilian response mechanism than we have had in the past. The United States will stay at the forefront of the global fight against AIDS. We're requesting $3.2 billion in total funding for care, treatment, and prevention efforts. But of course, there are other ways that we show our compassion. We're requesting $2.59 billion in food aid and non-food humanitarian assistance. The supplemental seeks $950 million for rehabilitation and reconstruction of areas devastated by the tsunami, including the $350 million initially pledged by President Bush. I welcome this committee's help, too, in ensuring that the men and women of the department, those who must carry out the diplomacy, are well equipped and are ready for the challenges ahead of them. Therefore, we are requesting $1.5 billion for security-related construction and $690 million to increase security for diplomatic personnel and facilities. We must also strengthen the recruitment of new personnel. We're seeking $57 million for 221 new positions to meet core staffing and training requirements. Finally, let me say that public diplomacy is a major concern and priority for me. We have had many studies about public diplomacy and the need for the United States to do this much better. I fully agree. Our fiscal year 2006 request includes $328 million for activities to engage, inform, and influence foreign publics, but it also includes an increase of $74 million over 2005 for educational and cultural exchange programs, bringing that total to $431 million, because we must stay open to the world. So many educational and cultural exchange programs, if you talk to leaders around the world, they were part of our international visitors programs, or they studied in American universities, and so this reflects our efforts there. Finally, we are asking for $931 million to improve border security, because we must keep America's doors open, but also its borders secure. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I very much look forward to working with you, to answering your questions today, but also to answering either in writing or by phone or through other members of my group any questions that you may have. And as you work through the supplemental and then the 2006 budget request, I absolutely pledge my complete cooperation to you so that we can get this job done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. We appreciate very much your openness and your commitment to cooperation with us. Before I begin my questions, we have a number of new members, so let me just, for them, tell how I work in this subcommittee on the questioning. I try to hold to the 5-minute rule and include it for myself. My ranking member will nudge me when my 5 minutes is up if I haven't stopped. I don't interrupt a question that's in the process of being asked or the answer, but we'll try to ask you to quickly get the question out if you've used your 5-minute time. I think it's the only fair way to do it, to make sure we get through a round of questioning and hopefully a second round of questioning with everybody. So with that, let me begin. And I'm going to cut my comments leading into the question short so that I can get to the question. And it has to do, the first one has to do with this issue of the security training, which I described in my opening statement. That there's that $750 million that's available for use by the Secretary of Defense to provide assistance to military or security forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, and for other military forces in friendly nations or nearby region to enhance their capability to combat terrorism and support U.S. military operations. Madam Secretary, can you explain the rationale of the administration for this division of responsibility for these programs? The supplemental request and the fiscal year 2006 budget request represent a shift from what has been a historic execution of these programs, implementation of these programs by the Department of State. Are we now shifting that on a permanent basis to the Department of Defense? How would you, as Secretary of State, propose to coordinate with Defense ahead of time on the use of these authorities and resources, and to make sure that these funds, who in the administration is going to be responsible for making sure these funds are managed correctly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me separate out several different types. Iraq, I think, is a special circumstance. We are in a war situation in Iraq, and we felt very strongly that the security forces needed to be under one training regimen, one training plan, and that is why both police training and military training, armed forces training, border training, all are in the Defense Department. They are also very closely coordinated with what the multinational forces do on any given day. And I felt strongly, and the Secretary and others, that the need to be able to allocate and appropriate within that what will be done by police, what will be done by border guards, what will be done by the armed forces is just is exceedingly important in a war zone. So I would set Iraq aside in this regard. Afghanistan, even though it is a war zone, we felt that the military training piece of this, again, because these are forces that are being trained and very often put right into the field, many times alongside our own forces, for instance, in the south of Afghanistan, that, again, the training of those forces in the Defense Department made sense. Now, when it came to police training, we looked at the question and decided to retain the police training in the State Department. Because the police training piece of it is, Afghanistan's going through a transition, hopefully from war to post-war stabilization efforts, and we think the police training should at least for now remain in the State Department, and so we've made that change. I think there was some earlier discussion of doing something different. In terms of countries, other countries, again, I think we need to remember that we are in a war situation, war on terror situation, where our military forces and the forces of these countries are very integrated in their operational efforts, and again, some of the training therefore needs to be done in the Defense Department. But I want to assure you, Mr. Chairman and the committee, that we have the tightest possible coordination on these efforts. It's the Chief of Mission is a kind of focal point for making certain that there is coordination. We also have an interagency group for both Iraq and for Afghanistan back in Washington that keep a close eye on these matters. But in general, when we are in wartime circumstances and forces are being trained and very quickly put into the field, very often to integrate their functions with what our forces need to be, the training, at least for military forces, would seem to make sense in the Defense Department.
Your answer is, I appreciate the answer, and I'm willing to leave aside Iraq, but I'm not sure I quite understand it. Your mention of the Chief of Mission coordinating this just opens up all other kinds of questions, but the money's not in State Department's control. I don't know how the Chief of Mission is going to be the one coordinating this. I'm going to have a lot of other questions there, but my time's going to run out. I want to get one other question in very quickly. Could you, I'll come back to that issue in the second round there. The issue of what is designated as an emergency, what is the criteria that the administration is using for identifying requirements as emergencies? For example, does the $150 million request for Pakistan really qualify as an emergency?
Well, these would be funds, emergencies in the sense that unexpected, in some cases unexpected opportunities, which you'll see that there are some, but in most cases unexpected needs to support activities. As you know, Pakistan's role has been shifting in this last year in terms of the kinds of things that Pakistan has been willing and able to do in pursuit of al-Qaeda. And the funding is needed for support of Pakistan in some of those activities. So again, when things are unanticipated, particularly between budget years, they've been included in the supplemental. But we've tried only to include those things that we believe have to be either spent out before 2006 budget funds are available or that were truly unforeseen.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You referred to specific numbers with regard to the funding of the Palestinian Authority. And as you know, direct funding of the PA has been limited to date and carefully monitored by the United States. The proposal to provide such assistance, for what purposes and under what conditions, remains vague. If you could explain the proposal, you already discussed the specific amounts, how it will be monitored, why you've requested an exemption from current law which allows such assistance under a secretarial waiver. I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. We believe very strongly that this is a time when we will want to be able to move quickly and flexibly to help the Palestinians get ready over what's going to be a very short period of time between the Israeli withdrawal and their need to be able to govern the Palestinian territories, particularly the Gaza. I will say that we have no intention of having this money disappear into the night. I know that there are concerns about accountability of the Palestinian Authority, about transparency, about corruption issues in the Palestinian Authority, and we've been very straightforward with the Palestinian Authority that most of this support is going to be project related. And that helps us on the issues that you are concerned about, Madam Congressman. And I think that we will want very much to consult with the Congress as we go forward with these projects. We're going to the London conference on the 1st of March. I think we'll get a better sense of what kinds of projects are needed to be funded by the United States. We will also work with the Palestinian Authority to find out what their needs are, as we have a World Bank study that actually we asked for that looks at what those needs are. But we intend most of this funding to be project support. It's important that we be able to do it directly with the Palestinian Authority because, in a sense, going through others will slow down our ability to do quick-acting projects, for instance, in the Gaza, that might give them a chance to forestall further gains by Hamas and some of the more radical groups. And it also will be a working relationship with the Palestinian Authority, which is trying to build the institutions of a democratic state. But I'm fully aware of the concerns that the Congress would have. They're concerns that I share about how the money is spent, how it's accounted for, and it's why I think the great bulk of this will be in project support.
Incidentally, one of my colleagues issued a statement, which you probably saw, saying that no money should go from the United States until Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region contribute their part. Well, I think we have to play an important role, certainly. But I'd be interested to know what Saudi Arabia, for example, has contributed to Palestinian redevelopment, and I would hope that other countries in the region would seize this opportunity to make this ceasefire and the peace plan work.
You are so right. In fact, some of the states, Arab states, have been fairly generous, but there are a number of Gulf states that have not. And some have pledged and not paid up. And I actually publicly said so when I was in Europe on television, anybody who would listen to me, that the Arab Gulf states, if they indeed do want peace, as they say that they do, have to step up to the plate and have to fund some of these Palestinian needs. And so you can be assured that as we are providing funding and as the Europeans are providing funding, we intend fully to press the neighbors of the Palestinians to help.
Have any of the states in the region written the check or offered to provide assistance?
There is support, even budget support, for instance, from the Saudis. There are some Gulf states that have made pledges that remain unfulfilled.
I think I have about 2 seconds. Okay. I realize that we've withdrawn our ambassador to Syria. Could you comment on that incident, and do you have any additional information about the assassination that you're free to share with us?
I'm sorry, I have no further information about it because we're not assigning blame, and I'd like to make that very clear. But the work has to be done now to investigate this. And the UN yesterday called for an investigation. We've called for an investigation. Everyone has called for an investigation. The reason that the Syrian, that we recalled our ambassador from Syria, however, is that given Syria's role in Lebanon, given the fact that it's been a destabilizing force for what is an incipient Syrian democracy, it was important to send a strong signal to Syria that we expect Syria to respond to the call under Resolution 1559 for Syria to stop its interference in Lebanese affairs and withdraw its forces. It's not the only problem we have, of course, with Syria. Support for Hezbollah, support out of southern Lebanon that is disrupting the peace process. These are all things, including Syrian territory being used by insurgents who are endangering our forces in Iraq. So while the Lebanese issue was the proximate cause, we have a lot of problems with Syria, and we hope Syria will be more responsive.
Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you. Mr. Luce is not here, so I'm going to go to the ranking member, Mr. Obey, and then resume the normal rotation. Mr. Obey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, let me just ask 3 questions. Number 1, what is our strategy in dealing with Iran? I continue to be mystified I don't see a clear direction in our policy. Secondly, I want to repeat my question about China. Given their record on human rights, which is miserable, given their record on democracy, which is just as miserable, given the fact that they are leading the world's march to the bottom on wages in a global economy, given the fact that they are not a real market, but a centrally controlled communist market still, given their conformist approach to their entire society, what is our strategy for dealing with China politically and economically, and how do we keep this relationship from? I mean, let me put it this way: if they're going to get away with murder, or pretty close to murder in economic terms and in political terms and in democratic terms today, if we don't find a way to bust through that, what on earth is our relationship going to be like with them in 35 years when they're the big gorilla on the block? The other question I would ask is the Palestinians. There are very few people in this Congress who have leaned over backwards as far as I have through the years to try to see to it that legitimate Palestinian interests are taken into consideration in the Middle East. And I've had many an argument with the Israeli government from time to time, under Shamir and others, when I thought that their West Bank settlement policy was mucking up a chance to make progress. But I have been so incredibly frustrated by the Palestinian actions the last 4 years. Now Arafat is gone, and so maybe they are going to sober up and wise up. But my question to you is, do you think they really understand? Do you think there is a broad enough and deep enough understanding on the part of a wide circle of Palestinian leadership that this is their last shot to get it right? They single-handedly destroyed the peace movement in Israel, and they brought Shamir to power, and now they squawk about it. But they produced this mess by not coming back with a proposal when Barak tossed one at them. I mean, are they finally in a position where they can be relied upon as an adult partner in this relationship to try to really make peace? Or are we all just spinning our wheels? I misspoke. I meant Sharon came to power. But I still can't tell whether they've got their act together, and I don't know if anybody can tell. But it would be nice if, for a change, they did. Just try those ones on for size.
Thank you. On the Palestinians, the words are there, and to a certain extent some of the actions are there. And the words that are important are the words that Mahmoud Abbas spoke when he said that the armed intifada is over. Because you're absolutely right, Congressman Obey, the failed intifada has had a more negative effect on the Palestinian people than it has had on anybody else. And they had a chance for peace in 2000. They did not take it because of Yasser Arafat, and it's been misery for the Palestinian people ever since. I think the election that Mahmoud Abbas won probably does demonstrate that the Palestinian people are tired of that approach and want to try something new. And our effort now has to be to try to strengthen that part of the Palestinian political leadership that understands that this is their best chance, and their best chance because they have also an Israeli Prime Minister, a Likud Israeli Prime Minister, who is prepared to start dismantling settlements in the Gaza. This was really unforeseeable a year and a half ago or so. So I can't answer whether they will deliver on this opportunity, but I do see signs that they understand, or that Mahmoud Abbas and those around him understand, that this is their best chance. They need to not just have an election, but they need to build democratic institutions, because democratic institutions will increase accountability for delivery on peace. They need to have economic development, because that will help to disable some of those who are not associated with this program. But I'm hopeful We are encouraging and we are warning that the Palestinians will have to fight terror in order for this to work. They don't have the ability to take a pass on fighting terror. So I hope this is the leadership that will bring it to fruition. The early signs are good, and I think we just have to pursue it and hope that the words and deeds continue to match up. In terms of China, we have developed, I think, a relationship with China that is constructive in that we cooperate with China on a number of issues, for instance, on trying to bring about a non-nuclear Korean peninsula through the six-party talks, in the war on terrorism, and so forth. But we are fundamentally aware of the problems in the nature of the Chinese regime. And since we are an administration that believes the internal composition of a regime does matter in its external behavior, the issues that you raise are, of course, concerning to us. We have been the ones in the international community that have pressed the human rights issues with China, the religious freedom issues with China, both with their leadership privately and in public fora like the UN Human Rights Commission. The strategy has been to try to take this rising China, which is an increasingly tremendous force in the region, and to, when possible, embed it in institutions that may embed it in a more rules-based approach to the international system. For instance, the World Trade Organization.
I thought it was working.
Well, I think the World Trade Organization does lead the Chinese to have to do some things in their economy that they might not otherwise do. And I don't know whether China will ever surpass the United States in economic strength, because one of the things that the Chinese, I think, will come to recognize is that the kind of creativity that comes from that is needed in the knowledge age, as opposed to in the industrial age, is usually not found in societies that tell their people to think at home, to think at work, but not at home. And so we may start to see some effect on the political system. I think that's a hope. And finally, on Iran, we are, I think, very clear that the developments in Iran, internally and externally, are out of step with the both our desires for the development of the Middle East and actually with trends in the Middle East. Whether you look at Iran's rather abysmal human rights record, it's the fact that it's going backwards in terms of political expression and opposition, despite the fact that this is a population that is quite sophisticated and has voted for reform. When you look at the fact that Iran is a premier sponsor of terrorism through Hezbollah, Palestinian rejectionist groups, at a time when we're trying to move toward a peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And if you look at the fact that the Iranians, we believe, and now others are suspicious too, are trying to build nuclear weapons components under the cover of a civilian nuclear program, you have a state that's out of step with where the Middle East needs to go. And our strategy has been to work with others to deal with each of these components of Iranian behavior, while recognizing that we should do nothing to legitimize a regime that is increasingly not legitimate in the eyes of its own people.
Thank you. Mr. Dolenberg.
Madam Secretary, how are you? Welcome to the subcommittee, and congratulations on your new assignment. A couple quick things. Iraq, we have a big challenge in Iraq. You know that better than anybody. I think we have to see it through, however. Elections were a big thing, and I think that was an important step. In my district, and I know you worked with us in ways to encourage and engage the Iraqi Americans back in Michigan. Thank you for that. There's over 25,000 that live in the district, and many thousand voted in the U.S. for the future of Iraq. And I hope you'll continue to work with us in regard to engaging them in whatever fashion, because they are an asset. North Korea, you spent a lot of time on it. My belief is that you were a strong opponent of the agreed framework, which I happen to think was fatally flawed as well. And I commend the President for changing that policy, because I don't think it was going anywhere, and I think now we see the disguise that they've played with us over these last several years. The Middle East, the same thing. It's generally an area that you have a great deal of interest in and have been working very hard to, particularly in negotiations on, among other things, on trade agreements that I think we're just beginning to get a start. and various assistance programs that these countries need, and I look forward to working with you on the reform. I'm submitting a number of questions, but I have one I want to go back to because Mrs. Lowy, right? Miss Obie's not here today, but Mr. Obie is. She's here too, yes, I know. Dr. Rice, as you know, the administration is requesting a large increase to the Palestinians. Now, it's $200 million, as has been mentioned in the FY05 supplemental, and $150 million in the FY06 regular budget. And what have a little sting to it for me, the $150 million request for 06 is double the amount that was requested in 05. Now, many members will consider supporting your request, but I know you don't underestimate this, but let me just remind you that it'll take a lot of work by you personally and your staff, your department, to build support for this on the Hill. Just to give you a little bit of a sense of scrutiny on this thing, the level of scrutiny, in the FY05 Foreign Operations Act, we'd included not one but 6 specific conditions or restrictions on funding. And I know the question was asked as to where this money is going for and will there be a prohibition on it getting into the wrong hands. But you mentioned project-related programs would be likely where it would go. But on this business of money being fungible, how do you really know it's going to be restricted just to certain projects, which are probably benign? That would be the hope, I would think. But there's a lot of questions here about how it will be spent and how it's accounted for, but how will we really know what that money is being spent for? And let me start with just simply this. Do you expect, again, it's a repeat maybe of the question with a little more intensity, do you expect any of the money that you're requesting in the supplemental in 06 to be given directly to the Palestinian Authority?
Well, the money would go, some of the money, probably much of it, would go through the Palestinian Authority for projects. Because we believe that's the quickest way to do it. And I will say, Congressman, that I do think the Palestinians have made quite a bit of progress on the transparency side, thanks largely to the fact that they have a very effective now finance ministry and finance minister in whom we have a lot of confidence, in whom the IMF has a lot of confidence. This is not the Palestinian finance ministry of 4 or 5 years ago, where I think we would not have wanted to see a dime go in. He has done things like posting the budget on the internet, making sure that payments are direct to through direct deposit to the security forces rather than cash to the security forces. So they've made a lot of changes on their own. In terms of budget support, I would expect that most of this would be project support because I understand the problems with budget support.
You can understand why we're a little tense about that. Let me just ask you, do you think that the assistance that's being made in this fashion will help reduce the influence of Hamas and other terrorist organizations?
Absolutely. I've been asked many times about the elections recently, the local elections in which Hamas did, of course, very well, 9 of the 10 municipalities. And if you look underneath, you see that the kinds of things that they were promising to do were clinics, that they were doing, clinics and sanitation projects, and frankly, things that the Palestinian Authority has not been very effective at doing because they've not been a very effective institution and they've been there's been a good deal of corruption. And so in order to compete politically, the Palestinian Authority is going to have to be able to deliver services and projects that affect people's lives, and that's the kind of work that we would hope to do with them. If it becomes the case that the Palestinian Authority cannot deliver as well as the, quote, political wings of extremist groups, then we're not going to be able to establish a peace, and that's why this funding is important.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Rice, welcome and thank you for taking time to appear before the subcommittee. First, I'd like to congratulate you on your recent confirmation. Many Americans, and in particular African Americans, have taken considerable satisfaction in President Bush's appointment of the nation's first 2 African American Secretaries of State. Congratulations to you. However, Madam Secretary, more important than your appointment are your statements and the President's declarations which have suggested to the world that finally Africa might again gain greater attention, involvement, and resources from U.S. foreign policymakers. I want to understand where Africa stands in your foreign policy vision. Secretary Rice, during the 2000 presidential debates, then Governor George W. Bush said, "Africa's important," end quote. 3 years later, at the start of his African tour, President Bush said, and I quote, "I'll be carrying a message to the African people that America cares about the future of Africa," end quote. Madam Secretary, on July 3, 2003, you yourself noted an important role that Africa within U.S. foreign policy when you stated, "This president takes seriously Africa, African leaders, and the potential of this continent to be fully contributing continent to world growth and prosperity." Does the President, Madam Secretary, and his administration still stand by these strong statements in support of the African continent and its people? And will you reaffirm that Africa is a top priority for your State Department?
Thank you very much. And absolutely, we have good partners in Africa, and we consider it a partnership. We don't consider Africa to be a target of our policy, but rather, like the rest of the world, very good partners in what we're doing. But we understand that it is a continent that has a lot of challenges, and so we've tried to meet those challenges through AGOA, which of course we've just extended to AGOA 3, through the East Africa counterterrorism initiative, which helps countries like Kenya that abut places that are really quite unstable. The Millennium Challenge Corporation, a number of the first states in that for the compacts are African states, and we expect that a significant portion of that funding will be for African states. The HIV/AIDS initiative, of course, with affected countries, most of them being in Africa. We put $1 billion into famine relief because this is a consistent problem in Africa. And then we have a new global peacekeeping initiative, which is to train principally African peacekeepers, because we have had good partnerships with ECOWAS in Liberia, for instance, and now with the AU in Sudan. And I think you would find, too, Congressman, that we're doing an awful lot on the conflict resolution side, because if Africa is going to attain its potential, then the Great Lakes problem and the DROC, I personally spend a lot of time on that issue, and we have a trilateral mechanism to try and deal with that. On Sudan, on Liberia, we've been very active. The President has seen many African leaders and, of course, made a trip to Africa in his first term. It is a very high priority for us because we believe that it is a place that has a lot of potential if you can deal with some of its problems, and because we have good partners there in almost everything we do.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Madam Secretary, I'd like to put your previous statements in the context of the President's proposed budget at this budget hearing. I believe in order to measure the U.S. commitment of resources for Africa, we must look not only at marginal increases or decreases in development assistance, the Economic Support Fund accounts, and the Child Survival accounts. We must also look at the true nature of challenges facing Africa, including poverty, disease, war, and even genocide. We must determine whether U.S. government's aid is enough to successfully assist Africa in overcoming these challenges. In the President's budget request, the top 4 country recipients of U.S. aid receive approximately $6 billion. But when we examine the President's budget request for all of sub-Saharan Africa, a region containing 48 nations, the President's request is approximately $3.6 billion. $6 billion for 4 countries, yet only $4 billion for 48 countries. I'm wondering how you can reconcile such an egregious disparity in funding for sub-Saharan Africa, especially in light of the challenges facing the continent and the administration's previous statements of its commitment toward sub-Saharan Africa. Long after your testimony, Madam Secretary, we'll be debating back and forth here in the committee over these priorities, and I wanted to try and hear your thoughts on how we reconcile them.
Stan.
Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you. Well, many of the countries to which you're referring are generally countries that are very closely, indeed integrally related to the war on terrorism and to the war that we've fought in Afghanistan and in Iraq. We have frontline states that have received considerable assistance because when the country was attacked on September 11th, we recognized that there were certain things that we had to do, particularly in the broader Middle East, in order to secure America. And much of that $6 billion I would directly relate to not just the global war on terrorism in its broadest sense, but the global war on terrorism in its narrowest sense, that is having to do directly with Afghanistan, directly with Iraq, directly with the Middle East, and directly with the frontline states that have to be supportive of us. For instance, we were discussing Pakistan a few minutes ago. Pakistan has taken on even new responsibilities between 2005 and 2006 in what it is doing in the frontier areas that have been a place where so much of the Al-Qaeda fled after, or the Al-Qaeda leadership fled after they were routed out of Afghanistan. And so we have to provide foreign military funding to Pakistan to deal with that. It's directly related to security issues. Nonetheless, the money that the $3.5 billion that you've talked about for African countries, I don't believe would include, for instance, our considerable AIDS initiative, which will directly help African countries with everything from mother-to-child transmission programs to improving health infrastructure, because in order to deliver antiretroviral drugs, one has to improve the health delivery system. The Millennium Challenge is going to be a major place that we can reward countries in Africa that are making the anti-corruption, good governance, healthcare decisions. The $1 billion in famine assistance goes almost exclusively to Africa. And so the peacekeeping initiative would be principally for Africa. So if you look just at the development accounts, I think we miss the total picture of what we're doing in Africa. But the big four, in a sense, relate to the specific circumstances out of September 11th.
Thank you. As I call on Mr. Sherwood next, let me just explain the other part of the Colby rule on questioning that I didn't explain, and that is that the question goes in the order of those who are here at the time that the hearing is gavelled to order, and those who come afterwards go down the line. So Mr. Crenshaw will follow Mr. Sherwood. Mr. Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Madam Secretary, welcome. We all understand what a wonderful face and voice for America that you will be in the world. As much as I'd love to ask you some questions about our success in the Middle East, I'd like to get back to the budget on the first round at least. And the 06 request for the portion of the Department of State budget under the jurisdiction of this committee totals about $22.8 billion, which is an increase of $3.3 billion over 05 enacted level, a 17% increase. This doesn't include supplementals or emergencies, as you well know. And according to OMB, non-discretionary, non-defense discretionary spending is going to be about 1% less than the fiscal year 05 level. And we're going to have reductions in or elimination of about 150 federal programs, including a 7.7 reduction in agriculture and a 3.5 reduction in energy and water, and only about a 1% increase in funding for Homeland Security programs. So, given the growing concern over the size of the deficit and all the things we have to do, our deficit is estimated over $427 billion and has some reduction in federal programs. Would you help us with the rationale for increasing foreign aid by 17% over the level of 05? And I'd like to have your thoughts about how important it is for this committee to have confidence that the previously appropriated levels have been well managed.
Thank you. When we embarked on the global war on terror, the initial phases, of course, were the war in Afghanistan, followed not too long after the war in Iraq. And a number of the costs associated with foreign assistance increases over this period of time really are related very directly to trying to support either diplomatically or in terms of partner support or economic support to partners, or operating expenses or expenses associated with the diplomacy to what our diplomats do in support of the war on terror, very much related to our war aims. As we move from the two wars that we fought to trying to move to a permanent peace, it's important to recognize that our instruments are going to be even more heavily drawn upon to use the diplomacy, to use the public diplomacy, to use our economic support for fragile states and for fragile countries to both solidify the gains that we have made as a result of the high costs that we've paid to liberate peoples, to throw terrorists out of territory. We now have to consolidate those gains largely through reconstruction and building institutions in these countries and doing the diplomacy to get others involved and dealing with failed states. So we have moved from a point at which much of our assistance was aimed directly at the frontline state support to a new phase in which we're really trying to consolidate those gains and leave the foundation for a permanent peace. I would really implore the committee to help us make the argument that we tend to think of the global war on terrorism, and we sometimes think of what our military forces are doing in the field, absolutely critical. Sometimes think of what our intelligence officials are doing, absolutely critical. Think of what our law enforcement people are doing, absolutely critical. But if we're going to have a permanent peace, what our diplomats are going to do, what our partners are going to do to secure countries that have to now be the bulwark against terrorism is going to be equally important to our ability to win the war on terror. I'm an old student of the Cold War. We won the Cold War as much by economic development in places like Europe and hearts and minds through Radio Free Europe and a Voice of America as we did by deterring Soviet military power. And 50 years later, we saw a very different world than anybody could have imagined. If we can do our work well now through our diplomatic means, through our soft power, through our educational and cultural affairs, through reconstruction assistance, through stabilizing these fragile states, and through spreading liberty and democracy, I really do believe that we'll be looking at a long-term peace.
And the second point, the confidence.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. We will always look, and I promise you that I will personally be interested in how we evaluate our programs, what is working and what is not. I'm a big believer in only doing what is working, and I assure you we'll be looking to see what works and what doesn't.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kilpatrick.
Nice to see you, too.
Congratulations, you make us proud.
Thank you.
Sorry?
All the mics are except for none of them on this side are working. Actually, this
Uh-oh,
one works.
I don't know.
Karen, go ahead. It's the way it's supposed to work.
Mine is.
Thanks, David. Okay, thank you very much. And again, Madam Secretary, most proud. Thank you very much. Iraq. I want to start with Iraq with my few minutes, just quickly. We've been there since March '03, spending more than $280 billion. We have a supplemental in front of us, $81.9 billion, of which $40 billion comes out of this committee, 3.8. Lot of loss of life, a successful election, some would say. We're happy that they did that, very proud of those who voted. I'm looking for a successful exit strategy. I want to know how long. I know no one can say how long. Are we considering any? I want to see some of those billions of dollars invested in Americans' family, children, schools, health center. It's almost impossible to do it when you're fighting two wars. Will you, as Secretary, working with the President, work on a successful exit strategy? Give us some hope here in Congress that we can someday soon begin to invest in America's children.
Well, thank you. I want to use the term a success strategy, if I may, because we went to Afghanistan as a direct result of the September 11th attack. That's where al-Qaeda was headquartered. And we've now managed, with a lot of lost treasure, and we mourn every death, to put Afghanistan on a road to a place that will fight terror, not support it. The question was, could you only have al-Qaeda and Afghanistan dealt with and really be dealing with the war on terror? And it was our very strong view that the Middle East has to change. And when I was answering Congressman Jackson's question, I talked about the big four. Well, Israel and Egypt, of course, you have to have a changed Middle East. If you're going to have a Middle East that will not support the ideologies of hatred that led people to fly airplanes into buildings on September 11th. And that's why a success in Iraq is so important, because it will put in the middle of the Arab world a state that is willing to fight terror, that is democratic, and that does not war with its neighbors. And so we have to succeed there. But the way to succeed there is to begin to get the Iraqis to the point that they can succeed on their own. And that's really the strategy.
And that's a long-time
Well,
proposition,
I
is
think
it
we
not?
will go through milestones. We went through a milestone when they got sovereignty. We went through a milestone in this election where I felt, Congresswoman, for the first time, I had a very strong sense that the Iraqi people had taken control of their political future, that they were willing to face down terrorism, they were willing to face down tyranny in order to take control of their own political future. Now they are building a government. We need to help them to build that, but they will be in charge. And for their security forces, it will be matter of training their security forces that can then take over the security tasks that the coalition is now doing.
Okay, can I stop you? Because
Yes.
thank you for that. And we'll continue to work and raise that question with you.
Absolutely.
Darfur, Sudan. Why is it that when Secretary before you, Powell and others, went and saw genocide, we, this country, and the United Nations has not labeled it genocide? I know genocide label gives extra other kinds of support. Why is that not happening as millions die, men, women, and children?
Well, the United States, through Colin Powell, did in fact say that we believed a genocide had been committed there. But the UN, in its report, has said that they do not believe that the technical definition has been met. Whatever the case, it's a horrific situation.
Absolutely.
And we need to do something about it. And we are trying, first of all, to get the Khartoum government to be responsible.
They are responsible for the genocide.
They're responsible for what's happening there. We'd like them to be responsible for helping to deal with it. And the first thing that they could do is to authorize the full AU contingent to go in. Right now, there are about 1,500 people there. The full contingent of about 3,300 is ready to go. We're putting pressure on Khartoum to do that. We hope that the North-South agreement in Sudan will give Khartoum some incentive to resolve the Darfur issue so that they can move along the path on toward normalization that they would like out of North-South. And finally, frankly, we need better help from our friends on the United States, the Nations Security Council. The United States has introduced tough resolutions, or wants to introduce tough resolutions. Others, for a variety of reasons, have not been prepared to do that, but we will continue to do this work, and we've recently are about to assign a chargé there who should be able to help monitor the situation more closely.
Thank you. Would like to work with you on that.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you on it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kirk is next.
Thank you. I was just absolutely thrilled to see your elevation. I remember when Tom Campbell first told me about you at Stanford, and it's been a phenomenal career, and I think your recent mission was just, as you well know, a smash success. And it worries some of us that how popular you were in France, but I think in general that was a very a good thing. I first wanted to compliment Team Islamabad working for you. That we have seen a dramatic uptick in the energy behind the Rewards for Justice program, reaching out to rural communities along the Afghan-Pakistan border with television ads, radio ads, and newspaper campaigns. 6 radio networks, 3 TV networks, and about every major daily in Pakistan in 4 different languages publicizing this reward. My understanding is your team is now bringing in 12 tips a day on bin Laden or lieutenants and where they could be. This is a program where 1,000 bad tips can come in, but if one good one comes in, we're a success. So I just want to, if you could pass on to Ryan Crocker and his team, bravo Zulu, absolutely a super job. But I do have a concern, you heard it here as well, about the Afghan drug program. The most that the Colombian drug lords ever earned was $3 billion. The U.S. government now estimates that the value of the Afghan crop last year was 7.5. We've never seen so much drug money hit a country at once. Afghanistan really is a narco state now, but it is not yet a failed state. So we have this window of opportunity. We have a proposal to provide Russian-made helicopters via DoD money to the Afghan police. We also have a proposal to provide State Department helicopters to the Afghan police under different orders, different chains of command, all coming to the same Afghan unit. I wonder if you can talk about the need to further enhance coordination, and I do want to compliment you on one thing. There was debate inside the administration to provide DoD lead on all police assistance. I think that would have been a huge mistake, and I'm very glad the administration came out against that, because we need to make sure that Americans in uniform are not near a police station, and especially not in an Afghan police interrogation room, because we know where that can go. And I want to compliment you on leading the charge to make sure that we have civilian-to-civilian assistance, and that we keep Americans in uniform somewhat distant from police functions. But can you talk about further coordinate DoD state?
Thank you. On the specific issue, I just received, I think, a letter, and I will respond to you on the specific issue. We have, in fact, really very good cooperation and coordination in the field. If you look at Afghanistan, General Barno and Ambassador Khalilzad are practically twins. They're there all the time, discussing, coordinating, working out a joint program. It's very clear that you have circumstances in a place like Afghanistan in which you have one chain because it's war and another chain which is the mission, but they know that the mission, the ambassador knows Afghanistan, and they have a wonderful coordination relationship. Similarly, between General Casey and John Negroponte out in Baghdad. We are looking at different kinds of coordination mechanisms because you might not want just to be personality dependent, and we are aware of that. And we're looking at what kind of executive committees might be necessary in these circumstances in which you have two chains. But I have to say, I think it's worked really brilliantly in both Afghanistan and in Iraq to date. And back here, we have had very strong coordination. When issues have come up that where there are differing views, we always have the NSC structure, either the Deputies Committee or the Principals Committee, or if necessary, the National Security Council, which the President himself chairs, which we've really not had to use on these kinds of issues. So I just want to reassure you, I think we have the very strongest coordination, and we hear very little problem.
Mr. Chairman, I saw in the proposal some very large foreign assistance programs to be, for the first time, funded out of the Defense Department. And I really don't think that we should provide Title X DoD funds as foreign aid to a government. I really hope that we transfer those funds to the state accounts, because the unity of effort behind the Secretary of State makes sure that the United States abroad speaks with one voice, which should be yours. And I hope that the Congress doesn't start an entirely new foreign assistance program run out of the Defense Department, because once again, that will bring uniformed Americans in very close proximity to police stations, interrogation rooms, etc., where I'm hoping we don't go.
I think that was a comment, not a question, but if you want to comment very briefly on that, and we'll go on to the next.
Well, the distribution as we have it now, I think, is wholly appropriate. And again, we're in certain circumstances, we're in war circumstances, and there needs to be very close integration. We recognize the concern that you raise about not having civilians, things that really should be civilian to civilian run by the military. Efficacy in some cases in terms of fighting the war on terrorism, in terms of being able to use forces that have just been trained right onto the ground in coordination and often side by side with our forces, has necessitated some change in where the training is done so that we can get the most efficient and most effective training. But on something like police training, where it at this time didn't seem necessary in Afghanistan, we've held that back and put it back into civilian police. And so we're quite aware of the issue.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rothman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, great pleasure and privilege to meet you and to have the opportunity to ask you some questions. and I wish you the best of luck. And I know you're a person of great intelligence and integrity, and I look forward to working with you. First, let me congratulate you and the President on your decision to withdraw the U.S. ambassador from Syria. Syria harbors terrorists. They are nothing but troublemakers. They oppress their own people, and they are intent on having American boys and young men and young women in uniform in Iraq be killed by harboring terrorists within their borders, as well as destabilizing the peace efforts between Israel and the Palestinians. I wanted to make one point. I know there's been significant comment about the $350 million, if you include the 200 in the supplemental and the 150 in the 06 budget for the Palestinians, aid to the Palestinians. And while I've met with many Palestinian leaders over the years and many Palestinian Americans, and want for the Palestinians and their children what I want for my own children and for every person on the globe, what the administration has danced around, and I understand, and what people dance around on eggshells is the reality that there exists in the Middle East today one of our dearest and most important strategic military allies, without whom the United States would be in a heck of a lot of trouble, and that's the State of Israel. State of Israel is America's forward military base of operations, if you will. They provide us military intelligence. They help us improve our military equipment. They're our trading partner. They vote with us more at the United Nations than practically anyone else in the world. They have been our dear friends, committed ally for over 56 years. I raise that point because after the Oslo Accords, when we were so hopeful that there would be peace between the Palestinians and Israel, and the Palestinians would give up their idea of driving the Israelis into the sea and killing all the Israelis, that many of the failures of the Palestinians under Oslo were simply overlooked. We turned, as the expression goes, a blind eye towards their failures to meet their commitments under Oslo, thinking that, oh, it's just a small matter, and let's keep our eyes focused on the larger picture. It turned out to be a bad strategy, and I hope that this administration will remember who our friend is. Our friend, our strategic military partner and devoted ally of 56 years, Israel, is fighting for its very survival. And if we don't make sure that the Palestinians live up to every letter of every word that they utter, then we're going to regret it, and our best friend in the region, the State of Israel, is going to regret it. So I'd like you to comment on that, but I want to ask you two more questions. That's my strategy for getting within the 5 minutes.
Please make them very quick.
Yes, sir. What is the administration's position regarding the Sudan on what kind of support the United States is going to provide to contribute to the UN-backed peacekeeping mission to Darfur? I understand that in 2004, the State Department requested 15 to 20 officers to be deployed to the Sudan to help them with their peacekeeping efforts, and could you update us on that? And finally, the new embassy in Baghdad, $1.35 billion. We've had a great deal of trouble rebuilding the infrastructure in Iraq to begin with. The electric grid and the water supply system is in equal or worse shape than it was under Saddam because of the insurgency that continues. And even though this embassy is supposed to be built in the green zone, our present embassy that is in the green zone was just hit with a rocket within the last several weeks. So it is vulnerable. Why shouldn't we take that $1.35 billion that you would like to earmark for this new embassy in Baghdad, which I don't think will ever a shovel be put in the ground within the next 12-month period for that purpose, and spend it on something else like supporting our soldiers with better equipment and getting them home faster?
Well, thank you. First of all, just on Israel, I believe we've been very strong friends of Israel, and Prime Minister Sharon has acknowledged that. We have really acknowledged that Israel cannot be expected to turn a blind eye to terrorism that is committed against it. And I think that has helped change the environment in the Palestinian territories. The president also refused to deal with Yasser Arafat, who I think never did make the decision that in fact he was going to live, that the Palestinians were going to live at peace with Israel. And I do believe that the fundamentals have changed some here, and that you're looking at a leadership now that at least recognizes that their future is with a peaceful, negotiated solution, not
Whether they'll have the strength to fight the insurgents is the question.
That's right.
You need 5 minutes to ask questions. So.
And that's why we are going to spend some effort working with them on their security forces to try to make those security forces part of the solution, not part of the problem. The Sudan is a complicated issue right now. We have the North-South that has gone pretty well. We have requested some money for support of the North-South agreement. We would hope that the North-South agreement gives an incentive to the Khartoum government to be more aggressive and effective on the Darfur problem. But the peacekeeping amount that is requested in the supplemental would include an assessment for a Sudan peacekeeping mission should we, a Darfur peacekeeping mission should we get to that place. A Sudan peacekeeping mission should we get to that place. It would also include about $55 million for a tribunal to try people in Sudan, which we think is extremely important.
And the embassy.
Thank you very much.
The embassy, I should answer. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'll be quick. We do need a new embassy. We need an embassy that can be in accordance with the security measures that we need to be able to take in terms of land use setbacks and so forth. We believe it can be completed in 24 months if we start right away. We need to get out of the palaces in which we are now existing, because we have an agreement with the Iraqi government that we will do that. And the reason that it's in the supplemental is because we need delivery of the funding to be able to get started on building it. We do believe that it can be built in 24 months.
Thank you, Mr. Crenshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me add my words of welcome and congratulations. Thank you for being here. We touched on Afghanistan and the problem with our narcotics, and I noticed in the supplemental there's, I think, $776 million primarily to go for that whole area, counter-narcotics, et cetera. But as you know, we've spent billions of dollars in the Andean region for counter-narcotics as well. And I guess my question in that regard is that maybe could you comment a little bit on the situation in Afghanistan, how we plan to spend that $776 million, but also I hope this doesn't, the fact there's no money for Colombia, which is primarily our focus, no money on an emergency basis, but comment on whether or not there's any shift in terms of priorities, because as you know, this is going to be a difficult budget year. There are going to be trade-offs made, and hope that doesn't signal that Colombia is no longer a priority. But could you kind of comment on those two things?
Of course. Plan Colombia is accounted for in the 06 budget because we now know how to plan for Plan Colombia. And we also have the Andean Regional Initiative there, of which Plan Colombia is the bulk. But of course, there are smaller amounts of money for neighboring states so that you don't have the breakout problem into neighboring states. It will remain an important element of our policy in Latin America. We have a very strong president there, and President Uribe, who really has now taken on the fight against the narco-traffickers. He's very aggressive about it, even assessed his own people in order to be able to build up security forces that could do this. So we remain committed to Plan Colombia, and the president has recently had a chance to say that to President Uribe when he was in Colombia back in November. As to counter-narcotics in Afghanistan, the problem in Afghanistan is that they needed an integrated strategy. The British have had the lead, and they have done some good things on counter-narcotics. But as the war is beginning to wind down, I would say that the most important threat right now is the counter-narcotics, or the narcotics threat, because you don't want the growth of narco-traffickers as owners of land and huge revenues from their narco-trafficking. We've adopted a 5-part strategy because you have to attack through eradication, you have to attack through alternative livelihoods, you have to attack through law enforcement. The Afghans have not really had police who are properly trained to deal with carnal narcotics, and this is something that rightly, I think the American military has been a little bit not wanted to be the ones arresting drug lords and the like. That we've been right not to want to do that. That means that there have to be Afghan police who can do that. It's one thing for the military when a warlord who happens to be a narco-trafficker is somehow engaging us in the terrorism fight, but law enforcement from Afghanistan needs to be on the front lines. And so training narcotics police, they have a special ministry now to oversee counter-narcotics. And finally, we've had to spend some funding, or will spend some funding, on just the public affairs side of it, delegitimizing poppy growing in Afghanistan, which has been a country in civil war, where unfortunately the growing of poppy really wasn't delegitimized. And so this integrated program, we would hope, would make will be better toward dealing with this. I will say that President Karzai made it a huge part of his inaugural speech, that this was something that the Afghan people had to take on, and that's a good sign.
Just real quick.
Yes, you do have time.
Mention Colombia and you know, this demobilization effort that they're making, and it's somewhat controversial, I think, in the Congress. But do you know, is there any money in the 06 request to help with that demobilization?
There is. I will have to get the figure for you. The demobilization that they are engaged in, there is some alternative livelihood, if that's a way to put it, that will. It's a demobilization and redirection of these people is going to be very important, and we will help with that, but I don't have the number for you. I'll get it for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fatah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations. I have 3 separate questions. Let me try to get through them in the time available. One is I'm a big supporter of the all-African peacekeeping efforts, and I think that part of the theory there is that given some similarities, they will be able to be a lot more successful than perhaps forces that would not have the same kind of feel for the ground. And I want to transfer that to Iraq for a second. I sent you some correspondence on February the 2nd, asking as to whether or not you could look into whether or not we could supplant the use of American forces in Iraq with using some of the forces from our Arab allies in the region so that we could withdraw our forces and have more of an all-Arab or all-Muslim force there until such time as Iraqis were sufficiently trained to do their own security. Because I think that part of the difficulties is with the whole, and I think our own studies have shown this, you know, the notion of occupation, the religious differences, and so on, and rather it's plausible, since the only reason we're keeping forces there is to keep the peace so that this new government could be stood up, is rather some of the forces in Egypt and Saudi Arabia and others that are in the armed forces of our allies that we have trained, we've armed, we've supplied over the years, whether they could be used, and whether we could draw down our forces. Secondly, I'm interested in the reconstruction issues there. We got some $20.9 billion that we've appropriated, only $5 billion or so has been spent. And I'm interested in whether or not, rather than providing new funding in the supplemental for some of the activities that you've laid out, including the coordinator's office, whether we could reprogram any of those dollars rather than use new dollars. And the second part of that question is about the use under the occupation authority of set-asides and particularly sheltered markets in the Iraq theater for some of the contracting, and whether you're going to expand that theory in other places around the world. It's an interesting contradiction, actually, to the administration's position here at home, which I know you personally differ with, that they're not in favor of set-asides or affirmative action, but we're using that in Iraq and to make sure that Iraqis have some opportunity at these contracts. And I'd be interested in whether or not the State Department is going to pursue that in other places around the world. And my last question is about the Middle East. I have thought for some time now that a pre-commitment of of American peacekeeping involvement, if there was a just and lasting peace arrived at between the parties, that it may push forward more quickly a resolution. We have peacekeepers after the Camp David Accord with Egypt that have been in the Sinai for a long time now, and it has helped, I think, solidify that accommodation. And most think that if there was a deal today, we would be involved in securing the peace anyway, and whether a more out-front commitment, assertive commitment in that regard, would help the parties come to an agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman. On the Arab forces, first of all, I agree about the African forces, and we've been major proponents of having African peacekeeping forces well trained. In terms of Arab forces, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. The Iraqis have not wanted, for instance, to have their neighbors for a whole variety of historic reasons involved in any kind of military or military operations in Iraq. And I just have to say there haven't been many volunteers, frankly, for these operations from the Arab world. I think there are a variety of historical reasons for that. There may be some reasons having to do with the nature of the security situation there, but the Saudis at one point tried to raise some forces. It really didn't work. The Iraqis have been, at least in recent months, far more focused on training their own forces and accelerating that training. In that regard, the use of neighborhood territory for some of that training has proven to be quite successful. The Germans, for instance, are training police forces in the UAE, and I think you may see more of that, and we certainly should be encouraging Iraq's neighbors and Arab neighbors to participate in the training, to help with the training, to allow training to take place on their territory. The having Arab forces as a part of the multinational forces simply never worked out, as I said, for a variety of historical reasons, and also, I think, because of the security situation. Our forces are going to be relieved when we can get those security forces of the Iraqis up and running, and we're putting new efforts into that. And one of the things that I learned when I was in Europe, that this is an area to which a lot of people are willing to contribute, the training of security forces. So I hope we'll have an acceleration of that training. As to reconstruction, we have obligated almost $11 billion of the monies that were spent, although the spend-out rate, as you said, has been more in the $3.5 to $4 billion range. That is in part the security situation, and it is important that we do this right. It was always meant to be a multi-year program, not a one-year program for reconstruction of the Iraqi security or the Iraqi infrastructure. What we are trying to do, and there have been a couple of reprogrammings, and people have been very responsive, and I appreciate that, is that as the situation has changed, we have gone away from some of the larger projects that would take place over a longer period of time to smaller, quicker acting projects that focus also more on job growth for the Iraqis, because unemployment is a big problem in places like Baghdad. Quick acting projects that we can use. There was a program reprogramming for $430 million or so for projects related directly to job creation, and also in some of the post-conflict cities like Najaf or Fallujah, places that had insurgencies, where we've gone in, done the military work to make sure that some monies can get into those places to stabilize those post-conflict circumstances. In terms of improving the possibility that Iraqis will actually participate in the contracts, we have made one of the conditions or one of the criteria in the selections of contracts that Iraqi labor and Iraqi skills be used. There are some tasks that really there are only a few contractors in the world, in some cases one or two, who can perform those functions, but we've tried to address the question of Iraqi employment and Iraqi engagement by strongly urging that. And in some of the more local projects, particularly ones run by commanders, Iraqis have been quite involved, even Iraqi construction firms and the like. Finally, in the Middle East, I don't think we're at the point, unfortunately, yet where we're thinking much about what kind of peacekeeping force will enforce the peace, although I certainly hope we will get there. What we are doing, and has been very helpful to the parties, is that the United States is taking a major role in the security coordination, security training, security equipment, equipping, not supplanting the parties, because they need to be able to do the security coordination between them, but when we are needed, being a major part of that. And that's why the appointment of General Ward from the Deputy Commander of the 7th Army Europe, I think, has been very well received, and he'll go out there sometime this week to meet with the parties. In that role, we've been very much welcomed, and I think we'll just have to see what is going to be needed when we finally do have a peace.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, before I call on the next person, Mr. Sweeney, let me just note that the chairman of the full committee has asked the subcommittee chairman to meet with OMB Director Josh Bolton here at 4 o'clock, and so I'm going to depart. And Mr. Sherwood, the vice chairman of the subcommittee, will take the gavel here. But I would also note for Mr. Sherwood and the others that the secretary has to leave promptly by 4:20. So I think we're only going to get through the round of questioning of the next two final people. Perhaps Ms. Loy will be able to ask a couple of questions, but I think that's about as far as we will get. I have literally scores of questions, unanswered questions, which brings me back to the point I made at the beginning that I hope that you or your designee, by that time perhaps the undersecretary, will be on board, and we can have one of you back up here. And we also need more detail on the supplemental request. We have a lot of detail that's missing on that, and that has to be the first order of business because we've been instructed by the chairman we're going to move very quickly on that.
We'll certainly work with you.
Thank you very much. So I will call on Mr. Sweeney and ask Mr. Sherwood to take the gavel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, welcome. It is both a spectacular and an exciting time in the broad sense, and I think certainly as it relates to your service to the country. If you think about it, we've had free elections in the Ukraine, in Palestine, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and I think a lot of it is due to the good work that you've done for the American people and really for the world, and I wanted to say thank you for that great work. As the chairman mentioned, we need to, this is an appropriation hearing, and we need to kind of get to the dollars and cents of a lot that is out there. So I'm going to jump in. I have a couple of other questions that I'll send to you, but I'm going to jump into one of the supplemental questions. You partially answered it when Mr. Rothman asked you about the expenditures on the Iraqi embassy, the construction of the Iraqi embassy in Baghdad. Having been there, I agree with you. We need to get out of those palaces. We need to have a different face on it. But my question is this. Last year, as a member of the Commerce Justice State Subcommittee, we we inserted language that was called the Capital Security Cost Sharing Program into the appropriation bill, the Department of State's bill, requiring that the agencies sort of pay their fair share of the costs on securing and building embassies around the world. And my confusion is this. I understand you're saying it's an unexpected need, or it's a new need that we hadn't necessarily anticipated, at least probably in terms of the detail. But I'm confused as to why $658 million in this supplement and what's DOS's contribution to that. My assumption was those kinds of initial costs we've already provided for them in past bills. And could you answer that for me?
My understanding is that the amount for the construction of the embassy has not been provided for in past appropriations. This is the planning for it. We had begun, but between 2005 and 2006, and the reason we want to do it in a supplemental is that we really like to get started, and obviously the appropriation will be available from the SUP before it is available from the 06 appropriation, that this is now the appropriation for that building. I will check to make certain that I'm right on that. But
if you would, and if you would be able to just provide for me, sort of the balance of what is DOS's commitment already on it, and how much is that, and those kinds of things.
I'll get that for you.
And we will be having conversations, I'm sure, in the next several weeks that'll get to that nitty-gritty. Second question I have relates, this is probably a little more philosophical than it is dollars and cents, but relates to USAID. And a little bit of a pet peeve that I have. I think they do great work We've got a request for almost $800 million in the 06 budget. Some would say that that is not nearly enough to provide for the infrastructure, the health and sort of social services kinds of programs they provide. But one of the, and you've touched on it, and I've heard you speak about this, one of the important needs that we have in developing countries or emerging markets is the need to help financial institutions, and sort of the economic infrastructure needs to kind of be provided for as well. And in many of these places, Iraq being a great example, Afghanistan being another great example, and there are many of them throughout the world, where the expertise doesn't quite exist. It seems to me that we've structured USAID in such a way and our diplomatic endeavors such a way that we don't have a mechanism in place to have that kind of dedicated focus on the establishment of financial services. For example, Bush 41 administration created a financial services volunteer corps. A former undersecretary in the Department of State, John Whitehead, heads that up. He's worked with me frequently with his frustrations in trying to find a more established way to begin to work in those markets. And I'm wondering if you've considered that at all, and if you have any thoughts on how we might, as appropriators, be able to better provide for that kind of service.
Well, thank you. It's a very interesting point, because you're right, the financial infrastructure often doesn't exist in these countries. In Iraq, we did it through basically putting together an ad hoc corps of people who went out and did this job, at one point headed by the former president of Michigan State University, an economist, Peter McPherson,
right.
And literally put people into the Ministry of Finance who were technical assistants to help them build that infrastructure. The Iraqis had the advantage of having a number of people who actually were free market oriented, had served at the IMF and places like that, and very often it's a matter of finding those people, bringing them back, and then providing technical assistance. In some places it's not there at all. And Afghanistan would be a place where, with the exception of really the finance minister and a couple of people, there really isn't that expertise at all. I would like to think some more about how we approach this, but one of the places that we've looked at when I talk about a civilian response corps, we don't have a place where we can gather that expertise and draw on it when we need it. And we've looked at one of the ideas that has been out there is a civilian corps of people who might be willing to go for 6 months or 8 months or whatever. Another place that we tend to have this problem is civil justice systems, where those also tend to be very weak in these stabilization, post-stabilization societies. And so it's a very good point, and I'd like to give it some more thought. But
I would love to work with you on that.
I'd love to work with you on it.
I think that we need to create a structure and a mechanism that you can work with to do that. And my final question relates a little bit in that area as well.
John, we're out of time.
I'll submit it in writing. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Next, we'll go to Representative Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Rice, I'm honored to be able to talk to you today. I want to thank you for all that you've done for this country. I'm just amazed at what you've been able to succeed in your service to our nation, and thank you for it. And I too want to go to the appropriations issue, or an issue that is of confusion to me. I used to be in the judge business, and I used to work with drug interdiction programs in Texas and in Mexico and other places. And you have some money here in this budget, and part of it's going to go to acquiring helicopters to work in the drug business over there in Afghanistan. And it's my understanding it's proposed that we're going to buy some used helicopters from the Israelis. I question why we would buy what I think are probably not as good a helicopters as we have in the Huey available right now, and why we would buy them from the Israelis, which would clearly inflame much of the conscience, especially of the radical Arab terrorists, that we were using Israeli helicopters in a Muslim country. And I just wonder if there's some reason why we're doing that.
Well, Congressman, this is an issue that has only recently come to my attention. I received a letter concerning it, and I will get back to you with an answer on what we're doing in this regard.
Well, thank you for that, because it just seems to me to be stirring the pot we don't need to stir, if you know what I mean. Well, I want to thank you for being here, and that's the only question I had.
Thank you very much, and I will get back to you, I promise.
Mrs. Lowy.
Thank you very much. Once again, I want to extend my appreciation to you for appearing before us. It's a long day, and you look as fresh as when you began. I guess after that very, very hectic European mission, this is easy, right? Thank you. Thank you very much. By the way, I believe, I didn't hear your response, those were American helicopters, B-12 helicopters that were available ready. Isn't that correct? They're American-made helicopters.
I will look into it. I was not really aware of the issue until I received the letter, so I promised to look into it.
Thank you so much. And I do have a couple of questions, and I'll try to ask them quickly. And I do want to say I'm particularly interested, again, in the spraying issue in Afghanistan. I think we talked enough about it, but our experience in Latin America shows that unless you're finding alternate sources of income, it's like a balloon. You press down on one end, and it comes out the other. What I'd like to do in closing is stress again my point that the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which certainly has outstanding purposes, and we're all supportive of the goals, but we're concerned that the $3 billion request will not be met by the Congress because, given the past experience of the MCC, they don't really believe that they can use that money. And again, I just feel this is such a great opportunity to build on the connection between national security and the Millennium Challenge account goals that I think we should use the money as effectively as we can. And given the chaotic state of the world, the war on terrorism, persistent poverty, suffering brought on by conflict and disease, it seems to me we should be focusing on where we can help right now in this fiscal year. I wanted to focus on one area where I've been concentrating a great deal of my energy, and that is on basic education programs. I've been pleased we've been able to increase the appropriation for basic education. And however, where we have effective basic education programs, the dollars just increase slightly because we're trying to divide it among many countries. A fundamental reprioritization, in my judgment, acknowledging the importance of basic education is long overdue, and I welcome your leadership in this issue. Frankly, my efforts to engage the State Department have not been very successful. So I'd like to know, what priority do you give basic education? Would you agree that it is the most basic, effective tool we have for preventing future acts of terrorism and HIV infection? In all my travels, whether it is in Africa or other parts of the world, everyone focuses on basic education. UNICEF has done some very exciting things, and I appreciate your comment.
Well, thank you. Education, basic education is really very critical, and especially, interestingly, education of girls, of course, is a particular subset of that.
If I didn't see the sand falling, I would have gone on to talk about that.
Because in places where girls are not educated and then have no future, those tend to be places that are not very well developed. It's an interesting correlation. I would hope that we can look at this together. I'd be most happy to talk with you about it. We've done some USAID has some wonderful programs in education, textbook work in Pakistan, where you have in President Musharraf somebody who wants to reform the educational system, even reform the madrasas to make these places that are teaching basic skills. We obviously are always trying to be sensitive, as you would be sensitive, to the fact that it can't be America coming in and doing their education. We have to support their educational initiatives and efforts. It's one reason that we have really underscored in things like the Millennium Challenge that educating your people is a basic part of being an accountable government, that you cannot simply push that off to the side. And so I look forward to working with you on it. It allows me, though, just to say one thing about the MCC. This is a potentially dramatic change to the way that development assistance is received and to its efficacy. And I think that's why people have been so supportive of the MCC. And not just people that one might expect to be supportive of this agenda, but I talk to non-governmental organizations all the time, development organizations all the time. The Monterey Consensus, which says good governance and care for your people and anti-corruption and health and education have got to be a part of the package if development assistance is really going to make a difference. We have a tremendous change going on in the way that people think about development assistance. The President and the United States are in the lead of that through the Millennium Challenge. Countries come in with their Millennium Challenge folder. Here's why we would be a good Millennium Challenge country. And it's made them think through things like their educational programs and their health delivery systems and what they're doing to fight corruption. And it gives us a tremendous tool to help shape these countries that need to think in that way. So I would hope that the Congress would fund the President's full request for this, because this is not just money. This is a fundamental shift in the way development assistance is viewed, and it's going to make development assistance so much more effective. We are now in the process of really getting compacts concluded. It took a while to get the corporation set up. It takes a while for these countries to develop compacts, because in some cases they even have to change practices or laws, and we want to do it right. But I recognize the need to have a sense of momentum in what we're doing with these compacts, and we need to have the money there so that we can, in good faith, sign the compacts.
If I may just briefly respond to Secretary, because I don't want you to misunderstand my views. I look forward to working with you on the Millennium Challenge account. I am enthusiastic about your enthusiasm, and I respect the President's creativity and his initiative. My only concern is that money is very tight in this budget cycle, and appropriating $3 billion when they haven't spent anything may be counterproductive, especially when other people are closing in with other budget requests. So I applaud your enthusiasm. I look forward to working with you. I'm hoping every country will place education first, because I do believe that would be a wise priority. And I look forward to having further discussions with you.
Terrific. I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Mrs. Lowy, spoken like a true Republican. You know. Madam Secretary, we very much appreciate your time here today. And as you may remember, about 3 years ago, we had a discussion around the big oval table down at the White House about what we were going to do after we won the military action in Iraq. And I wasn't as successful in that day getting the discussion changed as I would have liked to have been, but throughout our history, we've had pretty good success a couple times in transforming nations into democratic or quasi-democratic countries. Our success in Europe and in Japan after World War II are notable examples. And recently, we've had moderate success in Bosnia and Kosovo. At least we don't hear of the problems anymore like we used to, and we're not having a large loss of life there like we were. And key to these successes, of course, were a substantial military presence over an extended period of time, which is something we've got to be ready for in the conflict we're in now, substantial economic assistance and movement towards elections and establishment of civil government and return of refugees and all those very important things. But through the command and control models that we utilized in Bosnia and Kosovo differed from the World War II experience. What lessons have we learned in Bosnia and Kosovo that we can bring to bear in Iraq and help us solve this, you know, the very thorny situation?
Yes. I think the most important lesson, in a sense, from all of these conflicts is that we were very successful in 1945, but we did it. We did do it in occupation, and there was no question about it. It was a while before governments emerged, but even then, you had to have local leadership, indigenous leadership emerge, which would be a part of the decision-making process and actually able to make decisions on behalf of the people. In Bosnia-Herzegovina and in Kosovo, and for that matter in the Balkans in general, much of the work to be done is exactly in that area, is the emergence of indigenous leadership and governments that are capable of delivering for their people, because the international community or the United States or the coalition can only provide a framework. It really cannot deliver for the people. That has to be an indigenous, the people have to own their own processes. And what we're now seeing, I think, in Iraq, we were fortunate in Afghanistan in that that leadership emerged early in Hamid Karzai, and that leadership has then led Afghanistan now to a freely elected president and so forth. But what we're now seeing in Iraq, after the emergence first of the interim government and now the election of a government, is indigenous leaders that are, on behalf of their own people, going to stake out a political future. And we are now back in the process of providing a framework for that, providing to the degree that they cannot provide it security and stability, providing to the degree that they cannot provide it resources along with international partners for reconstruction and the like. But people have to chart their own course. And what was very encouraging about the Iraqi election was that despite the terrible threats against them and the terrible violence, they decided that they were going to vote and they were going to elect people to chart that course. I think the most important lesson from all of these is indigenous leadership has to emerge. The international community then has to provide them a framework and the development of the institutions, but it cannot substitute for good, strong indigenous leadership.
Thank you. I think the committee was loud and clear today that we're very concerned that the drug problem in Afghanistan could undo all our hard work. Congressman Fattah.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Sherwood. Let me just ask, rather than a three-part question, a two-part question this time. And thank you again for appearing before the committee. I'm interested in this drug issue too, and I'm interested in closer to home. We have a number of Caribbean countries right here that have been impacted negatively by narcotics trafficking and the influence of the money and the corruption from that on their governments. These are countries very close to home and can have untoward impacts on our own nation. And I'd be interested in what your plans are relative to the Caribbean. The whole question about diversifying these economies and the unfortunate result of our actions in terms of the banana regime and the challenge before the World Trade Organization. I think it's having a lot of impacts. We were talking a little bit before about economic controls in Iraq reconstruction, and just to revisit these dollars, a billion here, a billion there, pretty soon it adds up to some money. And the administration just did an audit of the early spend down in the occupation activity, and it was found that some $9 billion was not able to be accounted for. Now, Ambassador Bremer says, well, it's a war situation, and we were dealing in cash, and we couldn't wire it around. And but it leaves some question, at least in my own mind, if we're talking about the inability of Iraqis to keep track of dollars, when we had so many Americans there as part of the occupation authority, we should at least have some initial understanding of where those dollars went. And I think it's a paltry excuse that's been given. And I know that the administration, obviously by doing the audit, has some concerns, and I would like that the committee be kept abreast of whatever the follow-up may be. But on that and on the Caribbean question, I'd be interested in your response.
Certainly. We will most certainly follow up on what the audit and the follow-up to the audit shows. And that's, in effect, why you do audits, is so that, as you've just said. And so we're looking at that. It was a wartime situation, but there were controls in place, and so I think we'll have to see what the look at the audit reveals. The Caribbean has been an important area for us. We've had, of course, the Caribbean Basin Initiative, a series of trade and other mechanisms to try and help grow those very small economies. One of the things that we've encouraged them to do is to lower barriers between themselves. I mean, this is one of the problems sometimes among developing countries, if you know, which I'm sure you know, is that the tariff barriers between them are actually higher than the barriers from the outside, and so we've encouraged them to do that. They are at various stages of development in that regard, but the corruption problem, the CARICOM has had discussions about corruption initiatives, anti-corruption initiatives, because as you very well note, the same corrupt judge or corrupt policeman or corrupt border guard that allows a terrorist to cross also allows a drug dealer to get away with it, or an arms dealer. So when you improve the infrastructure against corruption by having a civil justice system that works, police that are not corruptible and the like, you really do improve overall security for the region. So we've been very concerned about that. Of course, Haiti is a special case, and there the goal has got to be to use this transitional period to get the Haitians to elections in the fall. But in the meantime, probably the most important thing, it goes back to the policing issue, is to have a demobilization of these militias and the building of a professional civilian police force in Haiti. And the Brazilians are leading right now a peacekeeping force that has significant policing functions and significant policing component. But if Haiti needs anything right now, it needs a civilian police force that is actually professional and capable. And we've spent a lot of our efforts on that. So the Caribbean has been the President has met a couple of times with the CARICOM leaders. We've had some initiatives through CARICOM, but I think the Caribbean Basin Initiative is probably the most important.
Congressman Carter, we could have a short one.
I'll try to make it short, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, when you're looking at the drug problem in Afghanistan, those drugs, the vast majority of the drugs that are being produced in Afghanistan are being wholesaled and retailed in Europe. Are we going to receive some assistance in this war on drugs in Afghanistan? It's going to be to me, I see that as a very cautious thing to do. We certainly can't go in right now and spray poppy fields, because the Afghans do not take kindly to foreign imposition into their business. The Russians can testify to that. And so I think we have to be cautious. That has to be an Afghan or an international objective, not just an American objective. How do you view that, and where would you see that, and are they going to cooperate?
Well, thank you. In fact, the British have had the lead on the counter-narcotics effort, and there are a number of countries that are contributing to the counter-narcotics effort. We've gone back to the British, and they've agreed to do more as a part of a coordinated effort. And indeed, the Russians have even expressed some interest, because they are suffering the effects of narcotics on the streets of Russian cities. So you rightly say that the problem of destabilization of the Afghan government by the growth of narco traffickers who become political factors is one that we all have to care about. But the fact that some of this product ends up in European cities has gotten the attention of the Europeans, and they've been contributing, and we would expect them to contribute more.
Thank you. The famous French Connection came out of Afghanistan. Right. Thank you.
Madam Secretary, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Very productive.
Thank you to the members of the committee. I look forward to working with you.
This committee stands adjourned.
You may indeed. Who should I make it to?
Oh, just your name.
Okay.
Or David.
Let's see, is it silver or, okay, so I'll sign it here. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That's